Hello everyone. Welcome back to Shadow Storyteller. If you enjoy listening to bedtime stories that carry history, mystery, and atmosphere, don't forget to subscribe, like this video, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support means the world, and it keeps these stories alive for many more nights to come. Now, tonight we step into a city that is filled with rhythm, secrets, and timeless echoes of music. Our journey begins in New Orleans, a place where the streets seem to hum with saxophones and trumpets even when the musicians have long packed up their instruments. But hidden away, far from the noise of Bourbon Street, there was once a shop known only to a few locals and the occasional wandering soul who stumbled upon it by chance. The Old Jazz Record Shop, as it was called, sat quietly on the corner of Toulouse Street, just a short walk from the Mississippi River. It had been there since the late 1940s, though by the year 1973, when our story begins, many people thought it had closed for good. Its wooden shutters were often half closed, its sign faded by decades of sun and rain, and its door carried the scent of old varnish mixed with cigarette smoke that had seeped deep into the grain. The man who kept it alive was named Albert Duval, a wiry gentleman in his late 60s with silver hair combed neatly back and a voice that carried the low, steady hum of someone who had smoked too many cigars. Albert had once played the trumpet in the French Quarter during the golden years of post-war jazz, but an accident in 1955 left him unable to play again. Instead, he devoted his life to collecting records, vinyl treasures that captured the magic of nights he could never return to but could still replay. The shop itself was dimly lit, with shelves that reached almost to the ceiling, filled with stacks of vinyl records in brown paper sleeves. Some of them were cracked with age, others pristine, wrapped in plastic as if untouched by time. A single fan rotated lazily above, and the air was thick with the smell of dust and faded perfume, as though every record carried not just music, but the breath of the people who had once danced to it. One humid evening in July, a young English traveler named William Harper pushed open the door. He had come to New Orleans on a whim, driven by stories he had read in magazines back in London about the birthplace of jazz. William was 23, a student of history, curious and restless, with a notebook always tucked under his arm. When he stepped inside the shop, a soft chime rang from the door, startling him as if he had entered a place that was not entirely meant to be found. Albert looked up from behind the counter, where he was carefully cleaning the surface of an old record with a cloth. He studied William for a moment, his sharp eyes narrowing, then gave a small nod of acknowledgement. "Looking for something in particular?" Albert's voice was calm, almost weary, but there was a hint of curiosity hidden beneath it. William hesitated, glancing around at the endless shelves. "I'm not sure yet. I suppose I was just hoping to find something authentic, something real." Albert's lips twitched in what might have been the beginning of a smile. He gestured toward a shelf near the back of the room. "Everything in here is real, son. You just have to know how to listen." As William wandered deeper into the shop, he noticed how quiet it was, almost too quiet, as though the walls themselves were waiting. He ran his fingers across the spines of records, stopping occasionally to read the faded labels, names he had only ever seen in books. Sidney Bechet, Jelly Roll Morton, Bessie Smith. Each name seemed to carry weight, as if they were more than musicians, but guardians of another world. And then he saw it, a record tucked between two worn sleeves, its cover unusually bright compared to the others. It showed a black and white photograph of a small jazz band playing in what looked like a smoky bar. At the center was a trumpet player, head tilted back, eyes closed, caught in a moment of pure abandon. William pulled it out and carried it to the counter. Albert glanced at the record, and for the first time that evening, his face changed. His eyes lingered on the photograph, and he seemed to drift somewhere far away, as if the record had opened a door in his memory. He didn't speak for several moments, and William began to wonder if he had made some kind of mistake. Finally, Albert cleared his throat. "That one. That's not supposed to be here," he said softly. "I thought I put it away years ago." William frowned, confused. "Why? What's special about it?" Albert looked at him for a long time, then leaned back in his chair, the light above catching the silver strands of his hair. "Son, some records don't just play music. Some records remember, and once you've heard them, you'll never forget what they want you to know." The fan above creaked, and outside the sound of distant thunder rolled across the humid night. William felt a chill, though the air was still heavy with heat. He glanced at the record again, his curiosity deepening. Albert slowly reached for a turntable behind the counter, his fingers trembling slightly as he placed the record onto it. "You came here looking for something real," he murmured. "Let's see if you're ready to hear it." The needle dropped with a soft crackle, and then, from the dusty speakers, the music began low, haunting, and alive, as if it was not coming from the record at all, but from the very walls of the shop. And in that moment, William felt as though New Orleans itself was breathing through the room. Under the soft crackle of the speakers, the melody began to weave itself into the dim air of the shop. It was not like any jazz William had heard before. The rhythm was slower, almost hesitant, as though each note was searching for something. The trumpet was raw and aching, echoing with a sorrow that dug beneath the skin. It carried a weight, not simply of music, but of confession. William leaned forward, his breath caught, as if afraid to miss even a fraction of the sound. Albert sat perfectly still behind the counter, his eyes fixed on the spinning record. The faint light of the lamp above gave his face the look of carved stone, yet the corners of his mouth trembled. His hand gripped the edge of the counter, knuckles pale. It was as if he too was listening for the first time, yet William sensed something deeper. He already knew this tune, and it was unraveling him. The music seemed to bend the air of the shop. The walls closed in, the shelves of vinyl leaning ever so slightly as though straining to hear. Outside, the rain began to patter against the glass window, a steady tapping that seemed to fall in time with the rhythm. William blinked and, for the briefest second, thought he saw shadows moving in the corners, figures swaying to the music though the shop was empty save for the two of them. "What is this?" William whispered, his voice breaking the spell for a moment. Albert drew in a long breath and let it out slowly. "That trumpet you're hearing," he said quietly, "was mine." William turned to him in disbelief. "Yours? But you said—" "I told you I stopped playing after the accident," Albert interrupted, his eyes never leaving the record. "And that's true. But before it happened, I recorded once, just once. A late-night session with some friends, nothing official. It was supposed to be private. Never for sale. Never for shelves." William felt his skin prickle. "Then how is it here?" Albert's face darkened. "That's the question, isn't it? I kept only a single copy, locked away. And yet," he trailed off, shaking his head, "records have a way of slipping through the cracks of time." The trumpet soared then, piercing through the haze of crackling vinyl, and William felt something inside him stir. He closed his eyes, and the world tilted. The record shop began to fade, replaced by a swirl of smoke, laughter, clinking glasses, the press of bodies in a small, crowded room. He opened his eyes and found himself no longer standing among the dusty shelves, but at a bar lit by dim bulbs strung across the ceiling. A live band was on the stage, and at the center stood a younger Albert, eyes closed, trumpet pressed to his lips. William gasped. The sound was all around him, not from speakers but alive, pulsing in the air. He spun around, and no one seemed to notice him. He was invisible, a guest in another time. The scent of whiskey and tobacco filled his nose, and the wooden floor vibrated beneath his shoes as the crowd tapped their feet in rhythm. And then he saw her. At the edge of the stage, near a table with a half-empty glass, sat a woman in a dark red dress. Her hair was curled, pinned delicately, and her eyes never left Albert. They carried a light, as though she was breathing every note into her soul. William felt the weight of her gaze, though it was meant for another. The music slowed, the band following Albert's lead as the trumpet softened into a mournful wail. The woman in red closed her eyes, and for a moment, it was as if the entire room had stilled, caught in that fragile note. William's heart clenched, though he didn't understand why. It was not his memory, not his story, yet the emotion bled into him like ink on paper. The vision snapped. The trumpet cut off with a sudden crack, the hiss of the record filling the silence. William staggered back, blinking, and found himself once again in the dimly lit shop. The fan above groaned, the rain outside was heavier now, and Albert was staring at him, his expression unreadable. "You saw something," Albert said softly. William swallowed hard. "Yes, a bar. A band. You. And a woman in red." Albert's eyes closed, and for the first time, his age seemed to collapse onto him. He leaned back, his hand covering his mouth. When he finally spoke, his voice was strained. Her name was Evelyn. The name lingered in the air, trembling like the last note of a song. Albert stood slowly, moving toward the shelves. His steps were heavy burdened. He pulled down a bottle of whiskey from between two stacks of records, poured a measure into a chipped glass, and drank deeply before speaking again. "She was everything," Albert murmured. "The kind of woman who didn't just listen to music, but lived it. She pushed me to play, told me I carried fire in my lungs. We were young, foolish, full of nights that seemed they would never end. That recording, it was made for her. A gift. She used to come to every session, sit in the same spot, always in that red dress." William felt the pull of the story, the rawness of it. "What happened to her?" Albert stared into the empty glass, his fingers tightening around it. "One night, she vanished. No note, no goodbye. Just gone. Some said she ran off with another musician. Others whispered darker things. I never believed any of it. I searched for her for years. That record was the last time I ever saw her alive." The air in the shop thickened, and the record continued to spin though no sound came now. The groove circling endlessly. William felt a chill crawl down his spine. He glanced at the photograph on the cover again, noticing something he hadn't before. In the corner, near the shadowed edges of the stage, a blurred figure stood. It was faint, almost invisible, as though caught halfway between being and nothing at all. He held it up. "Do you see this?" Albert leaned forward, squinting, his face drained of color. He reached out, his hands shaking, and took the sleeve. His lips pressed into a thin line, and for a long moment he said nothing. Then, barely audible, he whispered, She was never alone. The thunder outside cracked sharply, rattling the window panes. The shop seemed to shiver with it, the shelves groaning as if under pressure. William felt the instinct to step back, to leave, but something rooted him in place. The record had not finished its story, and he knew it. Albert placed the photograph back on the counter and lowered the needle again. The trumpet returned, softer this time, but now William heard something else beneath it, a faint whisper, hidden in the crackle. He leaned in, straining, his heart pounding. It was a woman's voice, fragile, almost lost, but there. "Help me." The words were clear enough that William froze. He looked up at Albert, who had heard them too. The old man's hands trembled violently, his breath coming shallow. "That's impossible," Albert rasped. "It can't be." But the voice came again, stronger, weaving itself into the notes of the trumpet. "Help me. Find me." William felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The record was no longer just music, no longer just memory. It was a message, a plea carried across decades, trapped within the grooves of vinyl. Albert staggered back, gripping the edge of the counter for support. His eyes filled with something William had not expected. Hope, raw and desperate. "She's still out there," Albert whispered. "Somewhere, somehow she's still calling." The rain battered the windows now, and the fan above them slowed to a stop, its blades creaking into silence. The room grew darker, the shadows deepening. William stood frozen, torn between disbelief and the undeniable truth that he had heard Evelyn's voice. And the record kept spinning, carrying secrets that neither of them could yet understand. The record spun, its grooves whispering through the needle with that fragile voice woven into the sound. The trumpet mourned, the bass hummed, and yet beneath it all was Evelyn, whispering from some place neither alive nor gone. William could hardly breathe. His mind raced with explanations, illusions from exhaustion, tricks of old vinyl. But none of them felt strong enough to drown the truth of what he had heard. Albert clutched the counter, as though it were the only thing keeping him upright. His face was pale, the years carved into his features now deeper than ever. But his eyes were alive in a way they hadn't been since William first stepped through the door. They shone with something between terror and yearning. "You heard her," Albert muttered, his voice trembling. "You heard her too. I'm not mad. I thought maybe all these years I just imagined it." He looked at William with a desperate intensity. "But you heard her, didn't you?" William nodded slowly. "I did. I don't know how, but I did." The record's crackling grew louder, the trumpet wavering as if from a distant shore. The voice came again, faint, but clearer now, as though it had sensed it was being heard. "Help me. Find me." The air in the shop seemed to thicken. William felt his skin prickle, every hair on his body rising. He wanted to turn and run into the storm outside, yet some invisible hand kept him rooted to the worn wooden floor. Albert reached for the whiskey again, poured a second glass, but his hand shook so much that half of it splashed across the counter. He didn't drink. Instead, he pressed both hands flat against the wood and closed his eyes. "When Evelyn vanished," he said, his words slow, halting, "people told me to forget her, that she had gone by choice, that it was foolish to chase shadows. But I couldn't. For years I asked questions in every bar, every back alley, every club. No one would tell me anything. Some swore they'd never even heard her name. It was like she had been erased, like she'd never existed." William frowned. "But she did exist. I saw her. I saw her in that vision, clear as day. Albert opened his eyes and met William's gaze. And now she's calling to us. She's trapped. That's the only explanation. That record. It isn't just sound. It's a door. The needle scratched suddenly. A sharp shriek of static that made both of them flinch. The voice was gone, replaced only by silence, as the record reached its final groove and spun endlessly. William stepped closer. What happens if we play it again? Albert's lips pressed into a thin line. That depends on whether you're ready to see what lies on the other side. The rain outside lashed harder against the glass, as though the storm itself was straining to be heard. The lights flickered once, then steadied. William felt torn between reason and the undeniable reality of what had just happened. He should have walked away, left the old man to his ghosts. Yet something in him, a hunger for truth, for history, for the unknown, would not let him go. "Then let's play it again," William whispered. Albert hesitated, his trembling hand hovering above the turntable. He closed his eyes, took a long breath, and lowered the needle once more. The trumpet began again, but different this time, slower, almost funereal. The shadows in the corners of the shop deepened, stretched, and began to move. William blinked, and once again the walls of the record shop faded away. He stood in the same smoky bar as before, but it was darker now, emptier. The crowd was gone, the laughter silenced. Chairs lay overturned, glasses shattered across the floor. The band was missing, save for Albert's younger self, who stood at the center of the stage, trumpet in hand, eyes wide with fear. And there she was, Evelyn, in her red dress, standing at the edge of the stage. But her expression was different now. Her lips moved, though no sound came. Behind her, in the shadows, the blurred figure from the photograph emerged, clearer now. A man tall, with a wide-brimmed hat that cast his face into darkness. His hand rested on Evelyn's shoulder, and she flinched at his touch. William's chest tightened. He wanted to call out, to run forward, to tear her from that shadow's grasp. But he was not part of this world. He was a spectator trapped in someone else's memory. Evelyn's eyes met his, just for a moment, and he swore she saw him. Her lips formed a single word: help. The vision shattered. William stumbled back into the shop, gasping for breath, sweat cold on his skin. Albert was slumped against the counter, his eyes wide, his body shaking. "You saw him," Albert whispered hoarsely. "The man in the hat. I always knew someone took her. I knew it." He buried his face in his hands, his voice breaking. "And I was too blind, too stubborn to see it then." The storm outside raged, lightning flashing through the narrow window. The fan above hung motionless, as though the air itself had died. The record continued to spin, silent now, but its presence pressed on them like a weight. William steadied himself. If the record is a door, then we can use it. We can go back again, see more, find out who that man was. Maybe we can uncover the truth. Albert lifted his head slowly. His eyes glistened, filled with pain and hope. "You don't understand, boy. This record, it's dangerous. Every time you listen, it takes more from you. Your breath, your strength, your soul. That's why I locked it away. That's why I swore never to touch it again." "Then why did you keep it?" William asked softly. Albert's voice cracked. "Because I couldn't let her go, even if it killed me." The two men stood in silence, the storm roaring around them, the shop trembling with secrets long buried. William looked again at the spinning vinyl. its black surface glinting under the dim light. He felt its pull, stronger than ever, like a tide dragging him towards some inevitable truth. "Albert," he said firmly. "If she's calling, we can't ignore her. Whatever happened, whatever danger there is, Evelyn deserves to be found. And if this record is the only way, then we have to follow it." Albert's jaw tightened, his hand clenching into a fist. At last, he gave a slow nod. "Then we'll do it together. But understand this, son. Once you step fully into that world, there may be no coming back." The record spun, the storm howled, and the shop seemed to breathe with them. Somewhere beyond the walls of time and memory, Evelyn waited. And the music had only just begun. The storm did not relent that night. Rain drummed against the windows in relentless rhythm. Thunder rolled across the river like cannon fire, and the shop itself seemed to tremble with every flash of lightning. William and Albert stood in silence, both staring at the record as it spun in endless circles. The air was heavy, the shadows in the corners stretched thin, and the faint smell of ozone mixed with the familiar dust of vinyl. It was as if the storm outside and the music within were locked together, feeding each other's energy. Albert finally broke the silence. His voice was low, hoarse and burdened. "When you saw her, when you saw Evelyn, she looked at you, didn't she?" William nodded. He could still feel the weight of her gaze, those desperate eyes breaking through time itself. "Yes, she looked straight at me. She spoke too. I think she was speaking to both of us." Albert pressed a hand to his chest, his breathing uneven. "I thought my memories had been playing tricks on me all these years. I thought the shadows in that record were mine alone. But now I know. She's still trapped somewhere. And that man, whoever he was, he's the reason." The words hung in the room like smoke. William felt the truth of them settle into his bones. He was not simply a witness now. He had been drawn into something older, something that demanded resolution. "Albert," William said, trying to steady his voice, "we need to know who that man is. If he took her, if he's the one who silenced her, then maybe the record can show us more." Albert's eyes were glassy with both fear and fire. "You don't understand what you're asking, son. Every time that needle drops, the line between us and them grows thinner. The past doesn't like to be disturbed, and once it notices you, it doesn't let you go so easily." "But Evelyn already noticed me," William argued, leaning forward, his words sharp with urgency. "She called to me, not just you. Maybe that's why I found this shop in the first place. Maybe that's why I'm here at all." Albert studied him for a long moment. Outside, thunder cracked, shaking the glass panes. At last he sighed, shoulders sagging under invisible weight. "Then if we're going to do this, we need to prepare. Not just our hearts, but our minds. The music will take us back, but it doesn't follow rules the way memory does. It might show us the truth, or it might bury us in lies. And we won't always have control." William swallowed hard, his fingers trembling as he touched the edge of the turntable. "Then let's find the truth before it buries us." Albert poured another glass of whiskey, but left it untouched. He steadied his hands on the counter, took a deep breath, and lowered the needle once more. The crackle filled the shop, sharp and electric. Then the trumpet returned slower, more distant this time. The room around them grew dim, the storm outside fading until all that remained was the haunting wail of brass. William felt his chest tighten, his vision blur, and then the shop dissolved once again. They were not in the bar this time. The world that formed around them was darker, colder. A narrow alley stretched ahead, lit by a single flickering lamp. The cobblestones were slick with rain, the sound of dripping water echoing off the walls. William shivered. He could smell damp stone, stale beer, and the faint sweetness of tobacco smoke. Ahead, the blurred man in the hat walked slowly, his arm gripping Evelyn's. Her red dress clung to her in the rain, her face pale but defiant. She resisted, pulling against him, but his grip was iron. He dragged her deeper into the shadows. William instinctively moved forward, but Albert's voice echoed near him, though Albert's figure remained blurred at the edge of the vision. "Don't interfere. We can only watch. If you try to touch them, the memory will tear itself apart." William's fists clenched helplessly. He followed at a distance, his heart pounding as Evelyn glanced back once, her eyes wide with fear. The man shoved her into a doorway, the sound of wood splintering under his force. For a moment, William caught a glimpse of his face beneath the brim of the hat. Sharp jaw, thin lips, and eyes that glinted like glass in the lamplight. Cold, calculating eyes. The scene flickered, the alley shuddering as though it could no longer hold itself together. Evelyn screamed, a sound that tore through the night. And then William was thrown back into the shop, gasping, his hands gripping the counter so tightly his knuckles turned white. Albert staggered beside him, sweat dripping from his temples. His breathing was ragged, his voice raw. "That man, I've seen him before. Years ago, in the clubs. He wasn't a musician. He was something else. Always watching, always waiting in the shadows. They called him Mr. Caldwell." William caught his breath. Then Caldwell took her. "And the record wants us to know it." Albert nodded slowly, though his eyes burned with grief. He must have silenced her. Maybe worse. But why would her voice still be here, calling to us? The question hung unanswered. The storm outside was quieter now, though the rain still fell. The record spun silently, the needle scratching at the end of the groove. The shop seemed to exhale, as though it too had witnessed something too heavy for words. William finally spoke. "If Caldwell took her, maybe there are records of him. Old police files, newspapers, anything. He can't be a ghost without leaving a trace." Albert shook his head. "New Orleans hides its secrets well. Men like Caldwell. They had power. They paid to disappear. But you're right. Somewhere, there must be a piece of him left." William grabbed his notebook, his pencil shaking as he scribbled the name. "Caldwell. Then we start digging tomorrow. Libraries, archives, even talking to the old musicians still around. Somebody knows something." Albert leaned back, his eyes drifting to the spinning vinyl. "And tonight?" William hesitated, then looked at the record. "Tonight we rest, because I think the next time we play it, it won't just show us. It'll pull us deeper." Albert said nothing. He lifted the whiskey glass, finally drank, and stared out at the storm as it began to soften into a steady drizzle. The record stopped spinning at last, its song unfinished, its secrets waiting. Evelyn's voice was silent for now, but William could still hear her in his mind. "Help me! Find me!" The night stretched on, heavy with what had been revealed, heavier still with what remained hidden. And as the rain eased, William realized something that chilled him more than the storm ever could. He was no longer just a traveler in New Orleans, no longer just a curious historian chasing music. He had become part of a story that had waited decades to be told, a story that was far from over. The night in New Orleans grew heavier as the storm gave way to silence. Rainwater trickled down the narrow gutters of Toulouse Street, and the air outside carried the scent of wet pavement and magnolia trees. Inside the shop, the record had stopped spinning. The needle rested at the edge, hissing with a faint static. William stared at it, unwilling to move, his body tense as though the music still lingered in his bones. Albert finally stood, his joints cracking as he shifted his weight. He looked older than he had just hours ago. His face was pale, his eyes sunken. Yet behind the weariness there was a fire that would not extinguish. He reached out, lifted the needle, and carefully placed the record back into its sleeve. His hands shook as though he feared what the vinyl might do if left unguarded for too long. "You should go get some sleep, boy," Albert said in a voice that carried both warning and weariness. "Tomorrow will bring questions neither of us may want answered." William shook his head. "I don't think I'll be able to sleep. Not after that. Not after seeing her." Albert sighed, pulled a stool from behind the counter, and sat heavily. He lit a cigar, the smoke curling lazily upward, mingling with the faint scent of old paper and varnished wood. "You're young. You've still got dreams that haven't been burned away. But you've stepped into something that doesn't care about your age or your plans. Once a record like this chooses you, there's no unhearing it." The words sank into William, but his resolve did not falter. He leaned against the counter, notebook still in his hand. "Tell me more about Caldwell. If we're going to find her, we need to know everything." Albert exhaled smoke, the lines of his face sharp in the dim glow of the single lamp. Caldwell was not a name people spoke out loud in those days. He was no musician, though he dressed like one. Sharp suits, fine shoes, always with that damn hat pulled low over his eyes. He had money, but no one ever knew from where. Some said gambling, some said smuggling. Others swore he dealt in people's souls. I never saw him play an instrument, never saw him dance, but he was always there in the shadows of the clubs watching. Always watching. "And Evelyn?" William pressed. "Did she know him?" Albert's eyes clouded. "She never said, but I noticed the way she stiffened when he walked in. She would grip her glass a little tighter. Her smile would falter. I asked her once, but she brushed it off. She said some men carry storms inside them, and it's best not to stand too close." The memory seemed to pain him, and for a moment's silence filled the room, broken only by the faint dripping of water outside. William scribbled in his notebook. Caldwell, shadows, clubs, Evelyn's fear. Every detail mattered. He could not let it slip away. When dawn finally crept over the city, it brought with it a soft golden light that spilled across the streets. The storm had washed the air clean, though the ground was slick with puddles. William and Albert stepped outside for the first time since the night began. The French Quarter was waking slowly. Bakers pulled open shutters, the scent of fresh bread mingling with the morning air. A stray cat darted across the cobblestones. Albert led the way down the narrow streets. His steps were slower than William's, yet steady, each one carrying the weight of decades. Their destination was the public library near Jackson Square, a grand building with tall windows and shelves that seemed to breathe with history. Inside, the air was cool and still. Dust floated in the beams of light that pierced through high glass panes. They moved to the archives, where bound newspapers and old city records were kept. William's fingers trembled slightly as he opened the first volume of the Times-Picayune from the 1950s. Hours passed as they searched. The quiet hum of the library was broken only by the rustle of pages and the occasional cough of another researcher across the room. William traced names with his finger, scanning for any mention of Evelyn, any whisper of Caldwell. Finally, Albert froze. His hand, old but steady, rested on a page. "Here," he whispered. William leaned over. The article was small, buried deep within the paper. July 1956. It reported the disappearance of a young woman named Evelyn Rousseau, last seen leaving a club on Rampart Street. No leads, no suspects, just a few lines noting her sudden absence. Beneath it, another article caught William's eye. A police raid on an illegal gambling den. Names listed of men arrested. Among them, Thomas Caldwell. William's pulse quickened. He looked at Albert. "It's him. It has to be. He was there, around the same time." Albert's jaw tightened. So the bastard wasn't just a shadow. He left his fingerprints on the city. They copied what they could, scribbling notes and dates. The trail was faint, but it was there, like a thread waiting to be pulled. By late afternoon, they returned to the shop, exhaustion settling into their bones. William placed the copied notes beside the record. He stared at it, the black circle that seemed so harmless, yet carried such weight. "Do you think," William began softly, "that the record wants us to keep playing it? That Evelyn is guiding us to the truth?" Albert looked at him with eyes full of both sorrow and stubborn resolve. "Maybe. Or maybe it wants to trap us the way it trapped her. Music can free a soul, but it can also chain one. You have to be careful which notes you follow." William felt the warning, but the pull was stronger than fear. He placed the record back on the turntable, his hand hovering above the needle. "Then let's find out." Albert exhaled deeply, as if surrendering to fate. He gave a small nod. "All right, but this time, no hesitation. Whatever we see, we endure it together." The needle dropped. The shop dissolved once more. This time they stood not in a bar or an alley, but in a grand hall lit by chandeliers. Music filled the space. Not jazz, but something slower, more formal. A waltz played by a small string ensemble. Men in suits and women in gowns glided across the polished floor. William felt strangely out of place, his simple clothes marking him as an intruder. At the far side of the hall, Evelyn stood again. She looked radiant, though her eyes betrayed unease. Caldwell was beside her, his hand firm on her back as he led her through the dance. She smiled faintly, but it was the smile of someone wearing a mask. Albert's younger self stood across the room, trumpet case in hand, watching with a storm in his expression. William saw the tension in his body, the way his fingers twitched as though aching to reach for her. But he did not move. The music swelled, and William felt the scene bend, the walls trembling. Voices whispered all around him, not from the dancers, but from the record itself. They spoke of debts, of promises broken, of power hidden beneath velvet gloves. Caldwell's name repeated like an echo, tying him to something larger than a single woman's disappearance. Evelyn's eyes flicked once more to William, and again he felt that connection. Her lips moved in silence, shaping words he could not hear. Then, as the strings reached their final note, the vision shattered like glass. William fell back against the counter of the shop, his chest heaving. Albert groaned, gripping his head. The record spun silently. William's voice was hoarse. "She's trying to tell us something. About Caldwell. About what he was part of." Albert nodded weakly. "And about why she never came back." The room was heavy with silence, the weight of secrets pressing on them both. William opened his notebook. his pencil trembling as he wrote down every detail of what he had seen. The hall, the dancers, the whispers, the mask behind Evelyn's smile. Albert watched him quietly. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "If we keep following this music, boy, we may find her truth, but we may also lose ourselves in it. Are you willing to risk that?" William lifted his eyes, his face pale but determined. "For her? Yes. For the truth? Yes." Albert stared at him for a long moment, then gave a weary nod. "Then let us see where the record leads. But remember this, once the last note plays, there may be no return." The record sat between them, silent for now, but alive in its stillness. Beyond its grooves, Evelyn waited, calling across the years, and William knew, with a chill that sank deep into his bones, that the music would not let them rest until the final secret was revealed. The silence in the shop seemed to breathe. The record rested in its sleeve, its dark surface glinting faintly in the dim lamplight. But William could feel it humming with a life of its own, as if waiting for them to return. Albert sat slumped on his stool, rubbing his temples, his cigar long since burned to ash. The storm had passed outside, leaving the night damp and heavy, the air still carrying the faint scent of rain. William broke the quiet first. "If we keep diving into the music, we'll keep seeing more. But I think we're missing something. Caldwell wasn't just some shadowy man lurking in clubs. He was tied to something bigger. Wasn't he?" Albert lifted his head slowly, his face lined with exhaustion. "You saw it yourself, boy. That hall wasn't just for dancing. Men like Caldwell didn't surround themselves with gowns and chandeliers unless there was business to be done behind the curtain. He had power, connections, the kind of threads that ran deep through the city." William paced the floor, restless. His notebook was already filled with hurried scribbles, but it wasn't enough. He wanted facts, proof, something tangible. If Evelyn got caught in that web, maybe that's why she vanished. Maybe she knew something she wasn't supposed to. Albert's eyes narrowed. If that's true, then we're not just dealing with a lost woman. We're walking into the kind of secrets men have killed to protect. The weight of the words settled heavy, but William felt no fear in them, only a stronger pull. He turned back toward the door. "Then we start asking questions. There have to be people still alive who remember Caldwell, or that hall, or even Evelyn herself. Musicians, bartenders, anyone who was part of that world." Albert gave a bitter laugh. "Careful what questions you ask. The city has a way of listening, and not all ears are kind." Still, he stood, stretching his stiff limbs. "But you're right. There are a few old names I can think of. If they're still alive, they'll be in the Treme or out by the bywater. Musicians never wander far from the sound." The next morning, they left the shop behind and walked through the waking streets of New Orleans. The French Quarter was alive with the scent of chicory coffee and fresh beignets, the chatter of tourists blending with the calls of street vendors. But beyond Bourbon Street, where the jazz grew less polished and more raw, where the houses leaned with age and the air carried history in its very dust, they searched for voices of the past. Albert led William to a small house with peeling paint on North Robertson Street. The porch sagged, but the faint sound of a trumpet drifted through an open window. When Albert knocked, the music stopped, and after a pause, the door creaked open. An old man stood there, tall though bent with age, his skin weathered like old leather, his eyes sharp as glass. His trumpet rested in his hand, the brass dulled by years. "Albert Duval," the man said, his voice a low rumble. I'll be damned. Thought you'd gone and buried yourself. Albert smiled faintly. Not yet, Lionel. Not until I get answers. Lionel's eyes shifted to William, then back to Albert. And what kind of answers drag you to my door after all this time? Albert's voice lowered. Do you remember Caldwell? The air seemed to tighten at the name. Lionel's hand gripped the trumpet a little harder, and his gaze hardened. He stepped aside, gesturing them in. Best not to say that name on the porch. Inside, the house smelled of polish and tobacco, the walls lined with photographs of bands and nights long gone. Lionel sat in an armchair, setting his trumpet aside, and motioned for them to sit. You boys stirring up shadows best left quiet, Lionel muttered. But if you're asking, I reckon you've already seen enough to know Caldwell wasn't just another man in a hat. William leaned forward. We think he took Evelyn Rousseau. We've seen glimpses. Lionel cut him off with a sharp look. Careful, boy. Glimpses come at a cost. You've been playing with something you don't understand, haven't you? His eyes slid to Albert, and the silence between them was heavy with old memory. So that's why you look like you've seen ghosts. Albert exhaled smoke. We have, Lionel. Or maybe they've seen us. Lionel's face darkened, but he did not argue. Instead, he spoke slowly, as if each word carried weight. Caldwell had his fingers in everything. Clubs, cards, women, even the police. Men like him didn't just own rooms. They owned the air you breathed when you stepped inside. And Evelyn. She was a light too bright for him to ignore. Everyone saw how he looked at her. Everyone saw how you looked at her too, Albert. But you couldn't protect her from that kind of man. Albert's shoulders slumped, his face tightening at the blow of truth. Lionel leaned back, his voice dropping lower. The night she disappeared, I heard whispers. Some said she knew about Caldwell's dealings, that she'd threatened to go to the papers. Others swore she was just another prize he wanted to keep for himself. Either way, she was gone before the week was out, and no one ever spoke her name again. Not if they wanted to keep playing in this town. The room fell into silence. William's pen hovered above his notebook, his pulse quickening. Proof, whispers, motive. Each piece was another step closer. Do you know what happened to Caldwell? William asked. Lionel's eyes grew distant. Men like him don't die the way others do. They fade into the cracks, their names scrubbed clean. But his shadow never left. Some say he still walks Bourbon Street at night, hat pulled low, eyes searching. I don't know if it's him, or just the city remembering what it can't forget. William shivered. He could almost see the blurred figure from the record standing in the doorway, hat brim hiding his face. Albert stood, his voice rough. Thank you, Lionel. That's enough for tonight. But as they turned to leave, Lionel called after them. Albert, be careful where that record takes you. Some doors, once opened, don't close again. They left the house in silence, the weight of Lionel's words pressing heavy on them. The sun was dipping low, painting the sky in streaks of red and gold. But the beauty of it did little to ease the shadows that followed them back to the shop. That evening, William placed the notes on the counter beside the record. The pieces were forming a picture now. Evelyn knew too much. Caldwell had taken her, and the record carried her voice across the years. But there was still more to see, more to uncover. Albert sat opposite him, staring at the sleeve as though it might burst into flames. Every time we play it, the visions grow stronger. If we drop the needle again, we may not come back so easily. William met his gaze. Then we hold on tighter. Albert gave a bitter smile. You've got the heart of a fool, boy. But maybe that's what it takes. The record was placed on the turntable once more. The needle descended. The shop dissolved into shadow. This time the vision was darker than before. They stood in a basement lit by a single swinging bulb. The walls were damp brick, the air thick with mildew and smoke. At the far end, Evelyn was seated on a wooden chair, her wrists bound, her red dress torn. Her eyes were wide, filled with terror and defiance all at once. Caldwell stood in front of her, his shadow stretched long across the floor. His voice was a low murmur, indistinct, but filled with menace. Evelyn shook her head violently, refusing whatever demand he made. Caldwell raised his hand, and she flinched. But then, for the briefest moment, her eyes turned and found William's. She saw him. She truly saw him. Her lips moved, and though no sound should have carried across time, William heard the words as clear as if she had spoken them into his ear. Don't let him win. The bulb flickered, shadows stretched, and the vision shattered. William collapsed onto the shop floor, gasping, his hands shaking. Albert was beside him, his face ashen. The record spun silently, its song unfinished. She's alive in there, William whispered, his voice trembling. Trapped, waiting. Albert nodded slowly, his eyes wet with something between grief and fury. Then we finish this. One way or another. The record waited. The city outside breathed. And the story, long buried in the cracks of New Orleans, demanded to be told. The hours after the vision in the basement stretched long into the night. William could not shake the image of Evelyn's eyes finding his across time. The desperation in her face, the trembling of her lips as she formed those words. He lay awake on a cot in the back room of the shop, listening to the city's heartbeat outside. The distant horns on Bourbon Street, the laughter spilling from late-night bars, the occasional sound of footsteps echoing in the alley. But behind all of it, beneath every note and whisper, he swore he still heard the faint hiss of the record, even though it had been returned to its sleeve. Albert, for his part, sat in the front room, the faint glow of a lamp outlining his tired frame. He had not slept. His eyes stared at the shelves of vinyl, but he saw nothing of the shop. He was trapped in memory, fighting ghosts too old to be silenced and too powerful to be ignored. By morning, the two men were shadows of themselves. William stumbled out of the back room, his hair tousled, his eyes burning with sleeplessness, and found Albert still at his post. You didn't close your eyes at all, William said softly. Albert shrugged. Sleep is for men without demons. The younger man set a pot of coffee on the old stove in the corner, the bitter scent soon filling the room. We need to find out where that basement was. If Evelyn was taken somewhere, it wasn't just any cellar. It had that dampness, that echo. Maybe it was beneath one of the clubs, or maybe Caldwell had a place of his own. Albert rubbed his jaw. There was a place, a gambling den off Basin Street, near the back alleys. Caldwell used it often. Police raided it once, but it opened again soon after. I remember the basement there. Brick walls, wet air. That could have been it. William's pulse quickened. Then that's where we go. Albert looked at him, weariness heavy in his eyes. Boy, that place hasn't been open in 60 years. Even if the building still stands, what do you think you'll find? Dust and rats. Maybe, but maybe something more. If Evelyn's voice is still reaching us through that record, then something of her lingers. Something we might be able to set free. Albert hesitated. Then he gave a resigned nod. All right, Basin Street it is. The two left the shop just as the sun was climbing above the rooftops. The streets of the quarter were quieter in the early morning. The smell of chicory coffee drifted from cafes, and a street cleaner pushed a cart through puddles left from the night's rain. They walked north, past Canal, until the ornate balconies and bright paint gave way to more worn facades, the ghosts of another era lingering in broken shutters and faded signs. The building stood where Albert remembered, though it was little more than a ruin now. The windows were boarded, the door sagged on its hinges, and weeds had overtaken the steps. A faded sign above the entry read Rousseau's in cracked letters. William felt a chill. "Rousseau," he whispered. Albert froze, his jaw tightening. Her family's name. They pushed the door open, the wood groaning in protest. Inside, the air was stale and thick with dust. Tables lay overturned, chairs splintered. Broken bottles glittered faintly in the dim light seeping through cracks in the boards. The silence was so complete it pressed against their ears. Albert led the way to the back, where a stairwell descended into darkness. The steps creaked under their weight as they went down, each footfall echoing. The smell of mildew grew stronger, and when they reached the bottom, William's breath caught. It was the basement from the vision, the same damp brick walls, the same low ceiling, the same single bulb, now long shattered, hanging from a frayed wire. William's heart pounded. He moved to the center of the room, staring at the spot where Evelyn had sat bound in the chair. The air seemed heavier here, as if the walls still remembered the cries, the struggles, the whispered threats. Albert stood at the threshold, his hand gripping the wooden railing so tight his knuckles whitened. His eyes shone with old grief, and for a moment William feared he would collapse under the weight of it. Then William heard it, the faintest sound, like a note of music drifting from nowhere. He froze. "Albert," he whispered, "do you hear that?" The older man's face hardened. "I hear it. Same as the record." The sound grew stronger, the ghost of a trumpet echoing against the damp brick. It swelled, and with it came a whisper, Evelyn's voice threading through the air. Not through the record this time, but through the room itself. "Help me," the voice pleaded. "Don't let him win." William staggered back, his breath coming fast. "She's here. Her voice, it's trapped in this place too." Albert closed his eyes, pained. "No, it's trapped in us. The record has tied us to her. Wherever her soul lingers, it follows." But William shook his head, determination blazing in his eyes. "Then we free her. We break this chain." He pulled the notebook from his pocket, flipping through until he reached the notes he had taken during their visions. The bar, the dance hall, the basement, each scene tied together, each one circling Caldwell. Albert stepped forward, his voice rough. "Boy, how do you intend to free someone who's been gone for 60 years? You can't wrestle with ghosts. You can't fight men already buried." William's hands trembled, but he stood his ground. "Then we fight through the music. We play it until the end, until every note reveals the truth." Albert's eyes darkened. That's the danger. Once the last note plays, it might not stop with her. It might drag us with it. William met his gaze steady. "Then we take the risk. She deserves that much." Albert stared at him a long time, then sighed heavily. "Fool heart," he muttered. "But maybe you're right. Maybe the music won't rest until it has spoken its last word." They climbed the stairs back into the ruin, leaving the damp basement behind. The sound of Evelyn's plea still lingered in William's ears, haunting him with every step. By the time they returned to the shop, the sky had darkened again, clouds heavy with another storm. The record waited on the counter, patient and silent. Albert poured 2 glasses of whiskey, his hands shaking slightly. "To whatever comes," he said. William clinked his glass. To Evelyn. They drank, then placed the record on the turntable. The needle dropped. The shop dissolved. This time the vision was vast. They stood in a grand theater, red velvet curtains framing a stage bathed in golden light. The seats stretched endless, filled with shadowy figures whispering in unison. On the stage stood Evelyn, her dress torn, her face pale but determined. Caldwell loomed beside her, his hand gripping her arm. He raised his other hand, and the whispers swelled, filling the hall with a dreadful chorus. Evelyn's lips moved again, and William strained to hear her. "Play the last note," she said. The vision trembled. The walls of the theater shook, dust falling from the rafters. The figures in the seats shifted and twisted, their faces indistinct, their voices growing louder. Caldwell turned his head, and for the first time William saw his face. Gaunt, pale, eyes black as coal. He smiled, a terrible grin that stretched too wide, and pointed directly at William. "Your turn, boy," he said, his voice echoing like thunder. The vision shattered. William collapsed, gasping, sweat pouring down his face. Albert knelt beside him, his own breath ragged. The record spun silently, the last groove whispering with static. Albert grabbed William's shoulder. "Did you hear her? She said play the last note. But what does that mean?" William's hand shook as he scribbled the words in his notebook. "It means we haven't finished the song. The record is incomplete. Until we let it play all the way through, she's trapped." Albert's face was pale. "Or maybe once it finishes, so do we." The rain began outside, pounding against the windows, the storm's fury echoing the turmoil within the shop. The record sat waiting, alive in its silence. William looked at it, then at Albert. His voice was steady despite the fear that twisted his gut. "We finish it. Tonight. Whatever comes, we finish it." Albert closed his eyes, then nodded slowly. "Then God help us both." The storm raged. The city held its breath. And in the small shop on Toulouse Street, 2 men prepared to play the last note of a song that had begun more than 60 years before. The storm outside seemed determined to rip New Orleans apart. Rain lashed against the windows of the old shop, and thunder rolled in waves that shook the shelves. The faint yellow glow of the single lamp swayed as though caught in the tempest itself. Yet inside, the world had narrowed to one circle of vinyl, a black sun resting on the turntable, grooves etched with secrets older than William's lifetime. Albert stood at the counter, glass of whiskey untouched in his hand. His shoulders sagged, his once strong frame bent by the weight of years and regrets. His eyes fixed on the record, unblinking, as if he feared that looking away would allow it to vanish or worse, awaken. William sat opposite him, notebook open, pencil poised, though his hand trembled so much the words on the page were nearly unreadable. Every line of his notes had led them here. The bar where Evelyn had sung, the grand dance hall with chandeliers, the basement of damp brick where her voice had begged for freedom, and the theater where Caldwell had shown his face at last. Every vision was a fragment of a story unfinished, a melody cut short. She said to play the last note. William whispered, his voice nearly lost under the roar of rain. Albert finally blinked, slow and heavy. A last note can mean two things, boy. An ending or a release. William lifted his eyes, determination burning in the shadows beneath them. Then it's both. An ending for him, a release for her. Albert let out a low, bitter laugh, though there was no joy in it. Or for us, the two men sat in silence, the storm outside warring with the storm within. The decision hung between them like a guillotine waiting to fall. But before William could lower the needle again, Albert raised a hand. Not yet. Not like this. William frowned. Why? Albert pushed away from the counter, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. Because if that record's last note is going to demand something of us, we'd best be ready. A man doesn't walk into a duel with an empty pistol. And make no mistake, boy, this is a duel. Between us and Caldwell. Between the living and whatever the hell he became. William hesitated, but then nodded slowly. So what do we do? Albert's gaze swept the shop. His eyes settled on a battered trumpet case resting on the top shelf, covered in dust. He reached up, pulled it down, and set it on the counter. The latches clicked open, and inside lay an instrument tarnished with age, but still gleaming faintly in the lamplight. This horn, Albert said softly, once played alongside Evelyn's voice. It carried her through rooms thick with smoke and sorrow. Maybe it can carry her still. If the record drags us into its world one last time, we'll need more than just listening ears. We'll need a weapon of sound. William felt a chill crawl down his spine. You mean to play against him? Albert's eyes, though weary, held fire. If music trapped her, then music can set her free. They agreed to prepare. Albert polished the trumpet, his hands moving with reverence and fear. William copied his notes into cleaner lines, arranging the visions into a sequence, as though the story itself could act as a map for what was to come. The hours slipped by, the storm raging until it seemed the city itself might drown. By midnight, the shop was a fortress of silence, the storm finally receding to a distant murmur. William and Albert sat across from one another, the record between them, the trumpet resting beside Albert's hand. "This is it," William said, his throat dry. Albert gave a single nod. "Drop the needle, boy." William's fingers hovered for a moment, then lowered the needle onto the spinning vinyl. The world dissolved. They stood once more in the Grand Theater, but this time the air was heavier, charged with dread. The seats were filled with shadows, their whispers louder than before, swelling into a wave of voices that shook the floorboards. The chandeliers above rattled, dust drifting from their crystals. On stage stood Evelyn, her body fragile, yet her eyes unbroken. Caldwell was beside her, his pale face twisted into that terrible grin, his hat casting deep shadows over his coal-black eyes. William's breath caught in his chest, but Albert stepped forward, trumpet in hand. "Caldwell," he growled, his voice reverberating across the hall. "You've kept her long enough." Caldwell's grin widened. His voice was silk wrapped around steel. "She sang for me, Albert. She was mine. She is still mine." Evelyn's lips moved. "Play," she whispered, though no sound carried, but William heard her clear as day. Albert raised the trumpet. The first note burst into the air, sharp and defiant, slicing through the murmur of shadows. The theater shuddered. The whispering crowd recoiled as though struck. Caldwell snarled, his grin faltering for the first time. "Then let's see," he hissed, and with a sweep of his hand, the shadows surged forward like a tide. William stumbled back, panic flooding him, but Evelyn's eyes locked onto his. She mouthed words again. Write it down. His notebook was in his hands, though he had not remembered bringing it. He opened it, pencil ready, and as Albert's trumpet blared against the storm of shadows, William began to write. Every note, every word, every echo. The theater shook with sound and fury, yet his hand moved as if guided by something beyond him. Caldwell raised his own hand, and from the shadows poured a sound, low and twisting, like 1,000 voices singing in reverse. It clawed at William's ears, making him cry out, but Albert blew harder, the trumpet's cry cutting against the darkness. The two forces met in the center of the hall, sound against sound, a battle of music and despair. Evelyn began to sing. Her voice, though faint at first, rose like light breaking through a storm. The shadows recoiled, Caldwell staggered, and Albert's trumpet found new strength beside her song. Together, they wove a melody that pushed back the darkness, note by note, breath by breath. William's hand raced across the page, transcribing a song not his own, a song older than the city, a song of resistance and freedom. His vision blurred with tears, but he did not stop. Caldwell roared, his form twisting, his face warping into something monstrous. He lunged forward, shadows pouring from his body, but Evelyn's song soared higher. Albert's trumpet blared louder, and William's words burned brighter on the page. The final note came suddenly, sharp and brilliant, a burst of sound so pure it shattered the theater. The chandeliers crashed, the shadows screamed, and Caldwell's form split apart into smoke and dust, torn into nothing by the force of the music. The vision cracked. The theater dissolved. William awoke on the shop floor, his chest heaving, sweat soaking his shirt. Beside him, Albert lay on his back, trumpet clutched to his chest, his face pale but peaceful. The record spun silently on the turntable, the grooves complete, the needle resting at the very end. On the counter lay William's notebook, open to the final page. Written there in his own hand was a song, full and complete. The melody Evelyn had sung, the trumpet line Albert had played, the final harmony that had broken Caldwell. The air in the shop felt lighter, as though a weight had been lifted from its very walls. And for a fleeting moment, William swore he heard Evelyn's voice, soft and free. "Thank you." Albert stirred, groaning, then opened his eyes. "Is it done?" William nodded slowly, tears streaking his face. "She's free." The storm outside had passed. The night was calm, the city breathing again. The record lay still, its purpose fulfilled. Albert sat up, weary but alive. "Then let the dead rest, boy, and let the living carry the song." William closed the notebook gently. He knew he would never forget the story it held, nor the night when sound itself had become a weapon, when a record had carried them through time, and when a woman's voice had broken free of the chains that held her for 60 years. The shop was silent once more, but in that silence was peace. Years later, William would remember that night not as a tale of terror, but as a story of release. The old jazz shop on Toulouse Street remained quiet, its shelves lined with records that carried only music, no longer whispers from the past. Albert still sat by the counter most evenings, trumpet close at hand, though he rarely spoke of what had happened. His eyes, however, were lighter, freed from the weight of a ghost he had carried for decades. William kept the notebook safe, its final pages filled with a song Evelyn had given them. He never tried to publish it, never tried to sell it. Some stories were not meant for fame or profit. Some songs were meant only to set a soul free. And sometimes, when the city grew quiet and the air was heavy with the scent of magnolia, William thought he heard it again. Just a faint trace of her voice, drifting like smoke on the night breeze. Not trapped, not pleading, but singing, finally unbound. The record had ended, the last note played, but Evelyn Rousseau's spirit lingered not in sorrow, but in the music of New Orleans itself, carried on forever in the rhythm of the streets.